They said he was gone forever. His name became a whisper, a carved memory on plaques and memorial stones, the kind of story teachers told in classrooms when they spoke of duty and sacrifice. The pilot who vanished during a mission that no one dared to speak about in detail. His aircraft had disappeared into the clouds, swallowed by the silence of war, and all that was left behind was a faint signal, a broken transmission, and wreckage scattered across impossible terrain. After weeks of searching, the military declared him lost, a hero who never returned, a man the world was expected to forget. But then, years later, he walked back into the light. It happened on a quiet morning without warning. At first, people didn't believe it. The man who stepped onto the base looked like a ghost more than a soldier. His frame was thinner, his face harder, eyes carrying shadows deeper than night itself. His uniform was no longer the crisp, proud attire of a fighter pilot. It was torn, patched, faded into colors no tailor's hands would ever allow. Soldiers on duty froze where they stood. Some whispered his name like a question, as though saying it aloud might break the spell. Others touched his arm in disbelief, half afraid he might vanish into smoke again. But he was real. Flesh, bone, breath. The missing pilot had returned. And when he opened his mouth to speak, the entire world seemed to lean in. "I wasn't supposed to come back," he said. His voice was low, steady, but lined with a weight no human should ever have to carry. "But I had to. Because you deserve to know the truth of what happened up there." The silence that followed was sharper than a blade. He began with the night of the mission. The orders had been clear, or at least, they seemed to be. A dangerous operation, a critical strike behind enemy lines. His squadron was briefed, their eyes focused, their trust placed in the commanders who handed them the mission dossier. The general's words echoed in his memory. "This mission is vital. The outcome could turn the tide of the war." But tucked between those words, hidden in the tone, was something he couldn't quite name then, a shadow. As the briefing ended, one of his closest wingmen whispered, "Doesn't it feel like they're sending us out to vanish?" He had brushed it off. Jokes about not returning were common in the Air Force. But when those words came from a general with eyes colder than steel, they carried a different weight. The night sky greeted them with deceptive beauty. Stars above, black clouds below, and the hum of engines as the squadron soared into the unknown. At first it was routine, formation, radio chatter, navigation. But then, like a beast uncoiling in the dark, the attack began. Enemy fire split the heavens. Explosions painted the clouds in colors of flame. His squadron scattered, voices screaming through the radio. "I'm hit. Mayday. Mayday," and then silence. One by one the dots on his radar blinked out, his brothers in arms consumed by fire. His own aircraft shuddered violently, alarms shrieking in his ears. He pressed on because that's what loyalty demanded. That's what training had carved into his bones. But then came the hit that ended it all. Engine failing, controls slipping from his grip. He ejected, flames licking at his heels, and the sky itself seemed to swallow him whole. He awoke in a place that didn't belong to any map. A wilderness of endless forests shrouded in fog, rivers that tasted of iron, mountains that tore the clouds apart. He staggered through days of hunger, nights of freezing silence, searching for any sign of civilization. But there was none. No villages, no rescue beacons, no paths leading back to the world he knew. Only exile, and the cruel reminder that his mission had ended not in triumph, but in oblivion. For months, then years, he survived. He built shelters from wreckage, trapped small animals with hands untrained for such work, drank from streams that kept him alive but never quenched the ache in his chest. At first he counted the days, scratching lines into stone, but eventually the numbers blurred. Time became a circle, each season bleeding into the next, until he no longer knew if the war outside had ended or raged on without him. "I thought I had died," he confessed, his voice trembling. "That maybe this was hell, a punishment made only for me." But fate had other plans. One night, he heard voices, human voices, breaking through the silence. He followed them cautiously, until he saw them by the fire. Other soldiers, not his own, not allies. Enemies. He froze, instincts screaming to hide. Yet something in their posture stopped him. Their shoulders sagged with the same exhaustion he carried. Their eyes flickered with the same hollow emptiness he saw in his reflection. They were prisoners of the same war, stranded, forgotten, left behind. He could have stayed in the shadows. He could have walked away. Instead, he stepped forward. And in that moment, the invisible line, the one that separated us from them, shattered. They didn't raise weapons. They didn't call him foe. They saw him for what he was, another broken man the war had swallowed whole. Together, they survived. They shared food, built fires, patched wounds. They spoke in broken words and gestures, trading stories of families they might never see again. One man had lost 2 sons. Another had lost his village to the very bombings the pilot had once flown to deliver. And slowly, painfully, the truth cut through him. The war had not just taken him. It had taken them all. And for the first time, he said, tears glinting in his eyes, I realized my enemy wasn't the man in front of me. It was the war that made us enemies. Years passed. He never said exactly how he was rescued, whether by patrol, chance, or mercy of fate. Only that one day, he was pulled out of that wilderness and returned to the world that had long written him off as dead. At first, he expected joy, applause, relief, his name restored in glory. But what he saw instead were questions sharper than knives. What happened to the mission? Did you complete the orders? Did you bring back intelligence? He looked into their eyes, the eyes of commanders, politicians, men untouched by the mud of the battlefield, and he understood. They weren't asking about him. They were asking about the mission, about their strategy, about the game they were playing from their polished offices.
And that is when he told them the truth.
The mission was never meant to succeed. His voice cracked, but his gaze was unflinching. We weren't sent to win. We were sent to die. We were the distraction, the pawns. They wrote us off before we even left the ground. The room erupted in gasps. Some shouted denial. Others bowed their heads, faces wet with tears they hadn't expected. He pressed on, years of silence finally breaking into words. I thought I failed you all when I fell. But the truth is, I never had a chance to succeed. None of us did. The mission was a lie. We were sacrificed, not for victory, but for someone else's convenience. He paused, his hands trembling, then his voice softened. Almost a whisper. But in that wilderness, with those men I once called enemies, I learned something no war can erase. Courage isn't blind obedience. It isn't dying for a cause you never understood. Courage is seeing the humanity in those who stand across from you. Courage is realizing the real enemy is the cruelty that pits us against our own reflections. By the time he finished, not a soul in the hall could hold back tears. Hardened men wept openly. Mothers clutched their sons tighter. And the silence that followed was not just grief. It was reverent. The missing pilot had returned. Not as the warrior they once knew. Not as a symbol of victory, but as a man who carried truth like a scar etched into his very being. And what he said about the mission, about betrayal, sacrifice, and the humanity buried beneath the ashes of war, left everyone in tears.